Hey everybody, Danny Ward here. Thanks for joining us. This week I'm going to give you 3 of my biggest mistakes I personally see when people are chipping. Now, it's pretty cold at the moment still. The ground is very soft, and striking your chip shots now is an absolute paramount. And this time of year, when the ground gets very soft, a lot of golfers struggle. They often catch it fat, a little bit heavy behind the ball, or desperately trying to strike it, they thin it over the back of the green. Now, I found that often the reasons for those things fall into one of these 3 things which we're going to give you in this week's training. So before we do, if you're new to the channel and this is one of your first videos, consider subscribing. I cannot release content like this every single week to try and help you improve your game. So before we get into the 3 biggest mistakes, let's just cover some real basics of chipping first, just how you set up to it. These are kind of really important. So before we get into the main bits, let's go through how we set up to the ball. Now, often people ask me about where do you put the golf ball. All I would say, look, is if you want the ball to go a little bit higher, move it more closer to you towards your left foot. If you want it to go towards a little bit lower, move it towards your back foot. If you don't really care very much, move it, keep it fairly central, right? Now, I find personally, for a lot of the golfers that I'm coaching as well, particularly the average member, they often have it way too far back in their stance. That sometimes actually is the hardest position to have it in. It creates too much jabbing action at the golf ball and often leads to a lot of thin and fat shots. So I'm going to discuss that in one of my biggest mistakes. But for now, keep the ball position fairly central. The width of your stance is about 2 club heads width apart, and I like to have the shaft fairly neutral. I don't want to have too much shaft lean here. A lot of people have been told that, so I like the shaft very vertical here. And one final thing here, nice tall posture. The club shaft is quite vertical, it's not kind of angled this way. We're quite close to the golf ball, feel a bit almost like we're crowding it. And one final ingredient which is very important at the setup is this: drop the left shoulder. Okay, keep that left shoulder down. So many golfers have this type of angle here, and all it does is it leads to this leaning back effect and almost gets them thinning the golf ball and fatting it. So in the setup, keep that left shoulder lower. You're leveling off the shoulders. It'll probably feel like you're actually dipping the shoulder quite a long way, but all you're doing here is leveling it off, and you're putting that little bit of weight on that left side. So now we've gone through the setup and some of the basics, let's go through the first biggest mistake I see. So once you've got the setup in play, the next thing here is this. See this a lot. I'm going to put a club down just as a reference point here. So what I find when people are swinging back is they get themselves set and they simply take the club way too far around the corner with their hands. And often this is a result of them trying to literally help the ball up in there. They're trying to get underneath the golf ball. So they tend to swing a little bit what we call in to out. Now the problem is, what that does is it creates this shape with the body also. We kind of get a little bit in, and as we go up here, the body starts to go backwards. And as we do that, okay, look at the left shoulder. Left shoulder's gone high. We even said in the setup that we don't want the left shoulder going high at all. We want to keep it nice and low. But when you swing in here, you go from a low to high swing, and that raises the body, leans it back, catching fats and thins. So what we want to do instead is start to work on the path of the golf club. So you can put a club along the line, it would be an alignment stick, or in this situation a club, and just start to get the club much more on line here, back, and you can just test that position and then back down on the same line. So let's have a look at that. Nice and simple exercise. Up on that line here, back down on that line, and as you can see, almost perfectly on line. So that is the very first thing I would work on, or just double check you're not doing. So once you've got the setup in place, just double check that. What are you doing online? Is your club online, or are you sticking it around the corner, right? Mistake number 1. Let's go to number 2. Mistake number 2 is kind of a misinterpretation of what we're trying to do with the strike of the golf ball. So if you've been struggling to strike the golf ball, you may have been striking the ball ground behind the golf ball, and because of that you're now thinking, I don't want to strike the ground behind the golf ball, I keep catching it fat, I've got to try and strike the golf ball first. So the problem with that, what tends to happen is you see golfers doing this, they start going at the golf ball. Now the problem when you start going at the golf ball, you start to get a lot of what we call this shaft lean. Now the problem when you get a lot of shaft lean is the leading edge, this sharp bit at the front of the golf club, starts to kind of dig into the ground. So the problem is that if you catch the golf ball first that's fine, you may be okay, the ball will scoot off a little bit, it'll go quite low, and you think, okay, that's not too bad. But if you're finding that you're doing that, but it's very inconsistent, here's the reason why. Because if you just are a few millimeters behind the golf ball, and you catch it with too much shaft lean here, the club digs and you'll catch it fat. So, we're going to do something that might seem a little bit strange, and what I'm going to show you here, I put a 20-pound note on the ground, and I have ruined it with 2 tee pegs, just kind of holding it still. And what I'm doing here is I basically put the ball 1/3 of the way towards the back of the 20-pound note, and what we're going to do here is we're actually going to look at catching the ground slightly behind the golf ball, but in doing so what we're doing is we have a very neutral shaft. So when I'm swinging here, I'm literally bruising the ground behind the golf ball. I'm actually going to release the club. Now the difference is because I'm releasing it now as opposed to going at the ground, because I'm releasing it, the flat bit of the golf club, which we call the bounce, glides through, so it doesn't dig now. The back of the golf club is starting to bruise the ground. So have a look at this, and we're going to try and take out almost the full width of that 20-pound note. So I'm going to go in now, trying to hit a few shots, just gliding through the back. Let's have a look at this. Lovely. Now what's happened there is I've literally caught the ground a fraction behind the golf ball there. It's glided through, there's barely any divot being taken with the wedge, because simply the bounce has been activated. I haven't gone at the golf ball in any shape or form. Now, one bonus tip here. When you're doing this, one of the key aspects to avoid shaft lean is actually pace. Try to keep the pace of the swing nice and smooth. Too often what I'm finding with a lot of golfers is they may try and do what we said here and take out this whole 20-pound note where we just catch the ground slightly behind the golf ball. But the problem is, if you rush and accelerate the club too much, just the mere form of accelerating at the ball creates this shaft lean here and gets the leading edge digging in. So when you're doing this motion, try and keep it really smooth as you're doing it. Alright, let's move on now to mistake number 3. So mistake number 3, I think it is possibly one of the hardest ones to get over, because here's what it is. Basically, what I find when people are chipping or they've been struggling with their chipping, they're trying to do too much too soon. What I mean by that is this: if you are struggling to strike your chip shots, then the last thing you should be worrying about doing is trying to get the ball near the hole. What I'm finding is everyone, so a lot of guys I'm teaching, is they tend to want to not only want to learn to strike the chip shot, but they also want to get it, they want to learn distance control really quick as well. Now I think what you got to do in the game is you've got to learn one thing at a time. The first 2 mistakes are geared around strike. Work on those first. Distance control comes second. So what I want you to do is simply this. I've given you a couple of exercises there where you can work on the line of your swing if that's the problem of one of the biggest mistakes. We've talked about, for instance, not getting too much shaft lean, so work on the pace and just this 20-pound note exercise. And the way you'd work on it is something like this. You get yourself set here. Yes, you pick out your target, the flag here, but what we're going to do is this. I'm going to hit a couple of shots and I'm going to focus on the 20-pound note, gliding and hitting that ground slightly behind the golf ball, but almost like gliding it through. So try and take the whole 20-pound note out. And I hit a shot here, and as you can see for me, that's actually not particularly good. It's finished about 10 feet short and about 4 feet to the right of the flag. Don't care. Why? Because what I'm doing is all I'm doing right now is I want to try to perfect my chipping action. I want to try and perfect the type of strike that I'm getting on the ground in this situation. I'm trying to do the 20-pound drill. That's all I'm focused on at this stage. I need to improve my strike. Distance control will come later. You can't learn distance control until you have a consistent strike. So work on your strike drills first. Once you've done that and you start to build some consistency. So watch this one here. There's another good example. Gone a little bit too long. All these here are good examples of not quite getting it right, but you know what? I'm happy. Why? Because I did what I wanted to do. I'm starting to get the strike. I'm trying to strike the ground a little bit more behind the golf ball. And that needs to be your intention in the early days. Now that's very tricky when you're playing, you want to play loads of competitions, etc. But it's the stage of the learning process. You try and rush in to get distance control right away. What I tend to see too many times is this. People are so desperate, they go, oh, I need to hit this, I need to accelerate to get it, I'm always short the hole. So they rush up, increase the speed. Or, oh, this is a delicate one, and they start to decelerate into the shot because it's a delicate shot. You need to, in a sense, learn the strike first. I promise you, distance control will come once you get that confidence that you know you can strike the golf ball. So I really hope you enjoy these three big mistakes. If you know some of your friends who could do with a little bit of help with their shot game, please share it. Of course, it really, really helps. And of course, if you're new to the channel and this is one of your first videos, give it a subscribe. And until next week, have a great golfing week.